The metallic chime of the environmental systems aboard Stellar Station Lumina always struck Astrid Blackwood as musical. Where others heard mere mechanical noise, she perceived complex harmonies, the deep thrum of gravity generators, the whispered hiss of air recyclers, and the gentle pulse of power conduits. Being blind since birth had taught her to hear the symphony in silence. Tonight, though, a discordant note disrupted her familiar soundscape. Astrid paused in the empty corridor leading to her quarters, her sonic walking stick held loosely in one hand. The vibration was wrong, a ragged, irregular pattern that spoke of pain and desperation. Following the sound brought her to a maintenance alcove, where labored breathing broke the station's usual rhythm. "Hello?" she called softly, her enhanced hearing picking up the subtle shift as whoever, or whatever, was hiding there grew still. A low growl answered her, unlike any sound she'd heard from human vocal cords. The universal translator at her throat crackled to life, but produced only static. Whoever this was, they weren't using any known language. "You're hurt," Astrid said, taking a careful step forward. The growl intensified, but she detected fear beneath the threat. "I can help. The medical bay is only 2 levels up." "No, medical," came the response, the words so heavily accented they were barely recognizable as standard English. "No, authorities." Astrid nodded slowly. "My quarters are nearby. I have basic medical supplies. Will you let me help?" The silence stretched for several heartbeats before she heard movement, the whisper of something scaling against metal, the subtle shift of mass that suggested her mysterious companion was far larger than a human. The air carried strange scents, ozone, something like heated copper, and an alien musk. "Why, help?" The voice was closer now, still rough but clearer. "Because you need it," Astrid replied simply. "And because everyone deserves kindness, especially when they're afraid and alone." A sound like a surprised exhale. "Not afraid." Astrid smiled. "Your heartbeat says otherwise." "I can hear it, too fast, irregular. But I also hear strength there. Pride. You're a warrior, aren't you?" "How?" "I listen. It's what I do. When you can't see, you learn to read the world through sound, through vibration, through the spaces between words." She extended her hand, palm up. "I'm Astrid Blackwood. I'm a sound engineer and musician here on Lumina." "And you are?" Another long pause. Then something smooth and warm, scaled, she realized, carefully wrapped around her offered hand. "Vorthak. Fourth blade of, no matter." He withdrew his hand quickly. "Pursuing forces, must not be found. Then we should get you somewhere safe before the next security sweep. They're very thorough since the Centaurian incident." Astrid turned and began walking, her sonic stick mapping the path ahead. "Can you move quietly?" The answer came in the form of movement so silent she had to concentrate to track it. Despite his size, and she could tell from the air displacement that he was massive, Vorthak moved with predatory grace. In her quarters, Astrid quickly learned that treating an alien warrior presented unique challenges. Vorthak's scales were arranged in complex patterns she had to carefully feel out to locate his injuries. His blood was hot enough to steam slightly in the station's air, and he had to talk her through using a strange crystalline substance from a pouch at his waist to seal his wounds. "You are unusual," Vorthak said as she worked. "Most humans fear difference." "Fear comes from not understanding," Astrid replied, her fingers tracing the edge of a sealed injury. "I've never understood fear based on sight. How someone looks tells you nothing about who they are. Your people would not agree. If they knew what I am." "Then it's good that I can't see what you are," she said with a slight smile. "I can only judge you by your actions. And so far, you've been nothing but respectful, even though you're injured and in danger." Vorthak made a sound she couldn't quite interpret, somewhere between a laugh and a purr. "You are dangerous, Astrid Blackwood." Me? I'm just a blind musician. No, he said, and something in his voice made her pause. You are one who sees truth without eyes. In my culture, such ones are considered blessed by the stars themselves. Before she could respond, the station's alert system pulsed, a sound she felt in her bones. Security sweep approaching this sector, the automated voice announced. All residents, please prepare for routine scan. Astrid felt Vorthak tense. The scan will detect me, he said. My species, prohibited in this sector. Then we'll have to make sure they don't scan you at all, Astrid said, already moving to her sound engineering console. Tell me, Vorthak, how do you feel about becoming part of a symphony? As security approached, they would find only what they expected, a blind musician working late on a complicated composition, her equipment generating such complex harmonics that any other readings would be meaningless. And if those harmonics happened to mask the life signs of an alien warrior hidden in her sonic isolation chamber, well, that was just part of the performance. What Astrid couldn't know then was that this moment, this simple act of kindness, would soon reshape the destiny of two species. But that's the thing about music, sometimes the most powerful symphonies begin with a single, unexpected note. 3 days after hiding Vorthak in her quarters, Astrid discovered that alien warriors made surprisingly good music critics. She sat at her composition station, fingers dancing over the haptic interface as harmonies filled the room, while Vorthak listened from his place in the corner he'd claimed as his own. The third resonance pattern, he said, his English improving with each passing day. It lacks weight. Like a blade without proper balance. Astrid adjusted the frequency, deepening the bass tones until they thrummed through the deck plates. Better? Yes. She heard him shift, scales whispering against the specialized cushioning she'd provided. You understand vibration as my people do. We use it for hunting, for communication across vast distances. Tell me about your people, Astrid said, saving her work and turning toward his voice. You've been here 3 days, and I still know so little. The silence that followed carried a weight she was learning to recognize, the burden of secrets too dangerous to share. Finally, Vorthak spoke, his voice low. We are warriors, yes, but not as your people imagine warriors to be. The Kethari, my species, we fight to protect balance. There are forces in this galaxy that would consume everything in their path. Like the ones hunting you. The swarm, he confirmed. They appear human to your scanners, but they are something else. Infiltrators. They take forms that allow them to move freely through civilized space. I was tracking a cell of them when they discovered me. Astrid frowned, remembering the news reports of strange disappearances on the station's lower levels. The missing maintenance workers? Yes. The swarm consumes identity as much as flesh. They learn, adapt, replace. Few notice until it's too late. Why haven't you warned station security? They are already compromised. Vorthak's voice carried a deep sadness. I watched them take Deputy Chief Thompson 3 days ago. The thing wearing his face now signs security reports and drinks coffee with his team, and none suspect. Astrid felt a chill despite the warmth of her quarters. How many? At least 20, perhaps more. They grow carefully, strategically. This station is a perfect target, a hub connecting 3 major trade routes. If they establish control here, they could spread throughout human space, Astrid finished. Her fingers found the edge of her console, gripping it tightly. What can we do? We. Vorthak moved closer, his presence suddenly looming over her. Astrid, you have already risked too much harboring me. I cannot ask. You're not asking. I'm offering. She stood, facing him with unwavering certainty despite her blindness. This is my home, these are my people. If they're in danger, I want to help. It will be dangerous. The swarm, they do not show mercy. Astrid smiled grimly. Neither does the vacuum of space, but we learn to navigate that. Tell me what you need. Over the next hours, they formed a plan. Astrid's ability to detect subtle changes in sound patterns could help identify the swarm. Their mimicry was perfect visually, but the vibrations they produced were slightly off. Meanwhile, her status as the station's sound engineer gave her access to environmental controls throughout Lumina. The swarm is sensitive to certain frequencies, Vorthak explained as they worked. It disrupts their ability to maintain their stolen forms. But the sound must be precise, powerful, and station-wide. Like a symphony, Astrid mused, her fingers flying over her interface. But we'll need to test it first. A small proof of concept. The maintenance shaft on level 12, Vorthak suggested. One of them uses it regularly for patrols. If we... He fell silent as footsteps approached in the corridor outside. Astrid held her breath, counting the steps, analyzing the pattern. That's not normal patrol timing, she whispered. No, Vorthak agreed, already moving silently toward her bedroom. They suspect. The door chimed. Sound engineer Blackwood. A voice she recognized as Officer Chen's called out. Security inspection. Just a moment, she called back, her hands moving swiftly to encode the frequency patterns they developed into an encrypted file. As she worked, she whispered, the sonic isolation chamber. They won't be able to scan it without shutting down half the station's audio systems. If they find me. They won't. She pressed a final command, then stood and smoothed her tunic. Trust me. She felt Vorthak's scaled hand brush her shoulder as he passed, a gesture she was coming to recognize as one of his people's signs of respect. Then he was gone, sealed in the chamber, and she was opening the door to greet her visitors. The scans took nearly an hour. Astrid played her role perfectly, the dedicated artist, mildly annoyed at the interruption but cooperative. She demonstrated her latest composition, carefully modulated to give the security team slight headaches that encouraged them to hurry their inspection. But as they were leaving, she caught something in Officer Chen's movement, a subtle wrongness in the way sound reflected off his form. Her blood ran cold as she realized, Vorthak was right. They were already here, wearing familiar faces, waiting to take more. When the door finally closed, Astrid leaned against it, her heart pounding. They're getting closer, she said as Vorthak emerged. We need to move faster. Agreed. His voice was grim. But Astrid, if we fail. We won't. She moved back to her console, determination straightening her spine. You know why? Why? Because together, we're going to compose the deadliest symphony this station has ever heard. Her fingers found the controls, ready to begin. And I've never gotten a bad review. What neither of them knew was that their performance would have an audience far larger than they imagined, one that would change the course of human. Morning aboard Stellar Station Lumina brought a new symphony of sounds, the increased bustle of the day shift, the hum of commerce in the trading halls, and beneath it all, a wrongness that only Astrid could hear. More of the crew's familiar movements had taken on that subtle distortion that marked them as swarm. 7 more since yesterday, she reported quietly to Vorthak as she worked at her console. Including Commander Walsh. They're moving faster now. They sense opposition, Vorthak replied from his position near her sound-dampening equipment. My presence, they know a Kethari warrior would not be here without purpose. Astrid's fingers paused over her interface. You never told me why you came alone. Surely your people would send more warriors for a threat this serious. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken weight. Finally, Vorthak moved closer, his scaled form radiating heat she could feel even at a distance. My mission was unauthorized. The Council, they believe maintaining our secrecy is more important than intervening in what they see as internal matters of other species. Even if those other species are being systematically replaced by shape-shifting parasites. Politics, he growled, the word carrying centuries of frustration, are the same in any civilization. The Council fears that revealing ourselves would cause more harm than the swarm. They remember the last Great War, when multiple species united against us, believing we were the invaders rather than the guardians we had always been. Astrid turned toward him, her unseeing eyes somehow finding his exact position. Tell me about that war. Help me understand. It was 3 centuries ago by your measurement. The swarm had begun their infiltration of the Proxima systems. We discovered them, tried to warn the local species, but... He made a sound like grinding metal. Our appearance, our ways, they frightened them. When we attacked those we knew were swarm, all they saw were monsters killing what appeared to be their own people. They united against us, drove us back to our own systems. The swarm used the chaos to establish deeper footholds. And now they've reached human space, Astrid said softly. But this time it's different. This time they have you to expose them. Have us, Vorthak corrected. Your ability to detect their harmonic disruption is something they cannot guard against. They do not understand how one who cannot see could be a threat. Their conversation was interrupted by a priority alert from the station's communication system. Astrid's console lit up with incoming messages. Something's happening. Multiple ships requesting emergency docking, refugee vessels from the Proxima colonies. No. Vorthak's voice carried horror she had never heard before. Not refugees. The swarm has taken the colonies. These ships, they are carrying the infection to new hosts. Astrid's hands flew over her controls, pulling up docking schedules and manifests. 6 ships, over 2,000 passengers total. Station protocol requires immediate accommodation for humanitarian emergencies. They'll be aboard within hours. We must stop them. If we reveal what they are without proof, it will cause panic. Worse, the swarm already among us will use the chaos to take more hosts. Astrid's mind raced through possibilities, through harmonics and frequencies and station protocols. But if we time this right... What are you thinking? The station's quarantine protocols. Her fingers danced across the interface. All emergency refugee situations require medical screening before full access is granted. During screening, they're confined to the medical bay and adjacent holding areas. If we can perfect our sonic weapon before they're cleared, we would have them contained, Vorthak finished. But the station's security forces will be too busy managing the refugee crisis to maintain their usual patrol patterns. Astrid allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes the best cover for a symphony is a larger performance. They worked through the station's sleep cycle, fine-tuning frequencies, layering harmonics that would disrupt the swarm's ability to maintain their stolen forms while leaving humans unaffected. Vorthak shared more about his people's previous encounters with the swarm, each detail helping Astrid adjust her calculations. But as they worked, Astrid felt something else developing between them, a harmony of minds, a synchronization that went beyond their mission. She found herself hyper-aware of his movements, the way his scales whispered against the deck plates, the subtle changes in his breathing when she spoke. Your people, she asked during a brief rest, do they have music? We have song, he replied, his voice taking on a quality she hadn't heard before. But not as you would understand it. We sing through resonance, through the vibration of our scales. Each warrior's song is unique, a signature that carries their history, their lineage, their... He paused. There is no word in your language. The closest might be soul. Will you share yours with me? The request seemed to catch him off guard. It is intimate. Among my people, to share one's song is to share oneself completely. Oh. Astrid felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. But I will, he said quietly. After we have saved your people. Consider it a promise of trust. Before she could respond, her console erupted with alerts. The refugee ships had arrived early, their captains citing deteriorating conditions aboard their vessels. Station Control, unable to verify their claims, had authorized immediate docking. How long? Vorthak asked, already moving to gather their prepared equipment. 20 minutes until the first ship docks. Astrid's hands were steady on her controls despite the gravity of the moment. We're not ready. The frequency modulation isn't stable enough for a station-wide broadcast. Then we fight them as they come. Vorthak's voice carried the weight of centuries of warfare. A symphony can begin with a single note, yes. Astrid nodded, determination replacing fear. Yes. And this one begins now. They had no way of knowing that their next actions would not only determine the fate of stellar station Lumina but would reshape the relationship between humans and Cathari forever. The symphony of war was about to begin, and its first notes would echo across the stars. The docking bay's atmospheric seals hissed as they engaged, a sound that Astrid had always found reassuring. Now, positioned in the environmental control room overlooking the arrival area, that same sound carried menace. She and Vorthak had minutes, at most, before the first refugee ship would connect with the station. The localized emitters are in place, she said, her fingers moving across her portable interface. I've masked them as standard atmospheric processors. Range is limited to the docking bay and primary medical screening area. It will be enough. Vorthak's voice came from near the door, where he stood guard. We do not need to expose all of them at once. Creating doubt, showing the station's crew the truth about even a few, that will be enough to stop the full docking process. Astrid nodded, making final adjustments to the frequency patterns they developed. Her fingers hesitated over the activation sequence. Vorthak, what happens to the real people? The ones the swarm is using as hosts. His silence told her everything before he spoke. The process of infiltration, it is not survivable. These are no longer your people, Astrid. They are merely shells occupied by the enemy. She swallowed hard, grief warring with determination. Then we honor them by stopping this from happening to others. The docking clamps engaged with a resonant thud that Astrid felt through the deck plates. Through her enhanced audio feeds, she could hear the ship's airlock cycling, the murmur of voices as station medical personnel prepared to receive the first wave of refugees. Now, Vorthak said quietly. Astrid activated the sonic array. At first, there was nothing, the frequencies they were using operated just beyond human hearing. Then came the screams. Not of pain, but of rage. Inhuman sounds that no human throat should have been able to produce. Through her audio sensors, Astrid tracked the chaos unfolding below. The sound of bodies contorting, of forms shifting in ways that defied physics. Security alarms blared as the station's sensors detected biological anomalies. And beneath it all, the steady pulse of their sonic weapon, forcing the swarm to reveal their true nature. Station security is responding, she reported, listening to the approaching footsteps. But something's wrong. They're not coming from the main security office. Because they are not real security, Vorthak growled. The swarm already among us moves to protect their own. We must hold this position. The door to the environmental control room shuddered under a heavy impact. Astrid's fingers flew across her interface, adjusting frequencies, trying to extend the range of their weapon to cover their immediate area. But they hadn't tested it at such close range, she had no way to know if it would work in time. Astrid. Vorthak's voice carried an urgency she'd never heard before. There is something you must know. If we fail here. We won't fail, she interrupted, still working. But yes, there's something you should know too. I can hear your song, Vorthak. Have been able to for days now. The way your scales resonate, the subtle harmonics of your movement, it's beautiful. The door buckled under another impact. Through the growing gaps, Astrid could hear the inhuman sounds of the swarm approaching. But Vorthak had gone completely still. You, hear my song. Yes. And I think that's why we were meant to find each other. Because sometimes the universe needs harmony more than it needs warriors. The door gave way with a screech of tearing metal. Astrid's fingers found the final command sequence, one they hadn't tested, one that could as easily kill them as save them. Do you trust me? With my soul, Vorthak replied without hesitation. Astrid smiled and activated the station-wide broadcast. But instead of their weapon's frequency alone, she added something else, the resonant pattern she'd learned from listening to Vorthak, amplified and interwoven with harmonics drawn from human music. A symphony of two species, combined into something entirely new. The effect was immediate and devastating. The swarm infiltrators recoiled, their stolen forms rippling as the combined frequencies tore through their ability to maintain cohesion. But more than that, the sound seemed to strengthen Vorthak, his scales resonating in harmony with the broadcast until he glowed with internal light. Through her audio feeds, Astrid tracked similar reactions throughout the station. The swarm's disguises failed everywhere the music reached, forcing them to reveal themselves before the very people they had tried to infiltrate. Pure chaos erupted as humans finally saw the truth of what had been hiding among them. But in the environmental control room, something else was happening. As Vorthak met the attacking swarm head-on, his warrior's skills enhanced by the resonant energy flowing through him, Astrid realized she could see him. Not with her eyes, but through the complex pattern of sounds and vibrations that their combined music had created. For the first time, she truly understood what her blindness had been preparing her for all along. "They're falling back," she reported, tracking the sounds of retreat throughout the station. "But the refugee ships are trying to disengage," Vorthak finished. "They must not be allowed to escape. The knowledge of what we've done here, of how to fight them. Already transmitted," Astrid said with a grim smile. "I've been broadcasting everything, not just the sonic weapon, but all our research, all the evidence, to every communications array in range. The swarm can run, but they can't hide anymore. Not from humans, and not from your people." She felt Vorthak move closer, his scaled hand finding hers. "The Council will not be pleased that their existence has been revealed. Then perhaps it's time for both our peoples to learn a new song." She turned her face up toward him. "One we can write together." The battle for Stellar Station Lumina was not yet over, but in that moment, something profound had changed. Two species had found harmony where there should have been discord, strength where there should have been weakness. And in the space between sound and silence, between warrior and musician, a new future was beginning to resonate. In the aftermath of the swarm's exposure, Stellar Station Lumina hummed with a new kind of energy. Through her enhanced audio feeds, Astrid monitored the organized chaos as station security, the Real security, worked to contain the few remaining swarm infiltrators. But her attention was primarily focused on the approaching ships she could hear through the station's long-range sensors. 3 Cathari warships, she reported to Vorthak, who stood beside her in the station's main control center. And 7 Earth Alliance vessels. All running with weapons hot. "The Council wastes no time," Vorthak said, his scaled hand resting near hers on the control panel. "They come to silence what we have revealed. And our ships come to protect what they see as a human station under alien attack." Astrid's fingers danced across her interface, bringing up the station's communication arrays. "We have maybe 20 minutes before they're in weapons range of each other." The past 6 hours had been a blur of activity. After their sonic weapon exposed the swarm, station personnel had rallied remarkably quickly. The few genuine refugees, those whose ships hadn't yet docked when the truth was revealed, were safely quarantined. The swarm's infiltrators found themselves trapped by their own strategy. The station's anti-tampering protocols meant that no ships could depart during a security lockdown. But now they faced a new crisis. Humanity's first official contact with the Cathari was about to be a military confrontation. "We need to show them," Astrid said suddenly. "Not tell them, show them." The same way you showed me trust, the same way I showed you that music could be a weapon. What do you propose? Astrid smiled, her unseeing eyes bright with purpose. A symphony. But this time, we broadcast everything. Not just the sonic frequencies that hurt the swarm, but the harmonies between us. The resonance that lets me see you through sound. The proof that our species can do more than just coexist, we can create something entirely new together. Vorthak was silent for a moment, considering. When he spoke, his voice carried both hope and warning. To share my people's resonance so openly, it goes against millennia of tradition. The Council considers our sonic abilities to be sacred. Sacred things are meant to bring people together, Astrid countered. Not keep them apart. Before he could respond, new alarms blared. The swarm ships they had contained were making one final, desperate attempt to break free. The impacts of their failed docking clamps tearing away shook the entire station. Hull breach on levels 3 through 5, the station's computer announced. Emergency containment failing. Astrid's hands flew across her controls. The vibrations from the impacts, they're creating harmonic disruptions in the station's structural integrity field. If we don't stabilize it, then we use the disruption, Vorthak said firmly. You taught me that sometimes discord itself can become part of the harmony. Can you isolate the resonance patterns of the station's superstructure? Already doing it. Her fingers never stopped moving. If we can match the frequency of the Cathari resonance to the station's natural harmonic, while using your human music to bind them together. They worked in perfect synchronization, their movements a dance of precise coordination. Astrid pulled the complex frequencies from the station's groaning structure, while Vorthak added the deep, powerful resonance of his people's ancient songs. Together, they wove these elements into the symphony they had created to fight the swarm, but with a new purpose. As the approaching ships entered communications range, Astrid and Vorthak broadcast their creation. But this was more than sound, it was a demonstration of unity. The Cathari ships would recognize their sacred harmonics being used not for war but for healing, strengthening the station's failing structural integrity field. The human vessels would receive clear readings of how the combined frequencies were actually holding the station together, preventing a catastrophic collapse. And through it all, Astrid and Vorthak's personal harmony sang, the story of a blind human woman who could see truth through sound, and a warrior who learned that music could be stronger than weapons. They're responding, Astrid reported, tracking the changes in the approaching ship's engine signatures. Both fleets, they're powering down weapons. The Council is hailing us, Vorthak added, reading from another display. And, they're addressing the message to both of us. Astrid reached for his hand, finding it without hesitation. Together? Always, he replied, entwining his scaled fingers with hers. As they prepared to answer the hail that would begin a new chapter in human-Cathari relations, Astrid reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. The swarm had sought to divide and conquer, but instead, they had inadvertently brought together two species in a way no one could have predicted. Through crisis had come connection, through discord had come harmony. The station's repaired superstructure hummed around them, resonating with their combined symphony. It was a new song, neither human nor Cathari, but something uniquely its own. Just like the partnership that had created it. You know, Astrid said as they waited for the communication channels to fully open, I never did get to hear your complete song. Vorthak made that sound that she now knew was laughter. Perhaps because it wasn't finished until now. Some songs, it seems, require more than one voice to be complete. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient dance, bearing witness to a moment that would reshape the galaxy. And in the space between worlds, between species, between sight and sound, a blind woman and an alien warrior had discovered that the greatest victories come not from fighting alone, but from learning to sing together.